All right, let's talk more about Rubio's potential to win the nomination. I want to bring in Rachel Campos-Duffy. She is the national spokeswoman for the LIBRE Initiative, a nonprofit that supports the U.S. Hispanic community. Good to see you. And CNN political commentator Patty Solis-Doyle. She was also the manager of Hillary Clinton's 2008 political campaign. Good to see you as well.
Good to see you.
Okay. Those votes won't mean anything. Rachel, you first. When he says he's skipping votes because they won't mean anything and there are other responsibilities, how does that translate to most people?
Well, if they're thinking hard about it, it makes sense. I mean, you know, until we get a conservative president in the office, these bills are just going to get vetoed at the president's desk. So I understand his rationale. Maybe it looks unseemly to the average voter, but he's actually making sense because everything does die in the Senate.
So, Patty, this is excusable? This is good rationale?
Look, I do agree with him when he says that everybody who runs for president misses some votes. Hillary Clinton missed some votes when she was running. However, what was it, 43% of his votes? That's a lot. That is an awful lot. And I think it feeds into the perception that Washington is just not doing its job. And so, no, I don't think this is going to serve Marco Rubio well at all.
Okay, so let's move on to Donald Trump. He was also on State of the Union today, and let's play now some of what he said.
You know, a lot of people think, well, I'm sort of a tough guy and I'm going to do it. I actually think I'm a really nice person. But some people say, oh, he's tough. I'm going to unify. This country is totally divided. Barack Obama has divided this country unbelievably. And it's all hatred. What can I tell you? I've never seen anything like it. Now, I'm going to unify the country. And sometimes I'll say that. People say, well, but the people that know me, and I'm talking about some of the biggest people in the world, they call up, they say, it's right, I've seen it. And, you know, one of the big knocks on me was that over the years I've gotten along with Democrats and I've gotten along with Republicans. And I said, that's a good thing. As a businessman, I had an obligation to do that, to myself, to my family, to my company, to my employees. I get along with everybody. I will be a great unifier for our country.
All right, so will his criticism of his, say, you know, fellow contenders on their intelligence, on religion, on their policies, does that make him a great unifier, Patty?
No. I mean, when you hear him say it, it's almost laughable. You know, Donald Trump doesn't like to lose, and when he loses, he attacks, as we saw with the polls that recently came out showing him he's losing to Ben Carson in Iowa. You know, first he attacks the polls themselves. He calls the Des Moines Register, the premier newspaper in Iowa, a third-rate liberal, you know, rag. And then he calls Bloomberg, the entire organization, that he writes it off because they hate him, apparently. And then he goes after Carson, who is beating him in Iowa, going after his religion. So it's just laughable when he says, I'm going to unify the country, when he is just, his rhetoric is so divisive.
So, Rachel, what do you think he means when he says that?
I don't know. I mean, he's absolutely correct that Barack Obama has been the most divisive president in recent history. Now, whether he's the antidote to that is, you know, there's a lot of questions about that. What I do think is that this is a very strong field, and it's not just a strong GOP field that's competing and fighting to see who comes out on top. It's the most racially diverse field in the history of America. If the candidate is not a minority, they're married to a minority. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity here as these debates unfold for us to find who is that conservative unifying candidate. That person will rise to the top. We're seeing ups and downs. I think it's so exciting. The Democrat primary is quite a bore to watch because it's a coronation.
All right, well, let's talk about another Republican, Ben Carson. He was on NBC's Meet the Press today. Listen to what he had to say about his beliefs on abortion.
In the ideal situation, the mother should not believe that the baby is her enemy and should not be looking to terminate the baby. You know, things are set up in such a way that the person in the world who's the greatest interest in protecting the baby is the mother. We've allowed the purveyors of division to make mothers think that that baby is their enemy and that they have a right to kill it. Can you see how perverted that line of thinking is? During slavery, and I know that's one of those words you're not supposed to say, but I'm saying it. During slavery, A lot of the slave owners thought that they had the right to do whatever they wanted to that slave, anything that they chose to do. And, you know, what if the abolitionist had said, you know, I don't believe in slavery. I think it's wrong. But you guys do whatever you want to do. Where would we be?
Definitively, do you want to see Roe v. Wade overturned?
Ultimately, I would love to see it overturned.
All right, so that was Ben Carson. All right, so he is enjoying a lead into, you know, Iowa polls. I wonder, Rachel, these comments, does that help him maintain his lead, or does that help him lose it?
It sure does, and it helps him gain. And first of all, I'm going to speak to you not as a spokesperson for Libre, but as a mother, a Latina mother of 7. And I will tell you that, you know, the arguments, the people who enslaved black Americans during that era, they were powerful groups over another taking control over another weaker group and saying that they weren't sufficiently human. These are the same arguments that are used on abortion. And what he said about people standing on the sidelines, during that time, during our history of slavery, there were many people who said that this was an injustice, but hey, I'm not going to tell other people what to do. And then there were the brave abolitionists who stood up against this human injustice. And so that's what he's speaking about. I think he's speaking about it from the heart. I think it's going to speak to the GOP base. And I think he does it in a way that is very gentle, very non-judgmental. And I think that it resonates very much.
And Patty?
Well, speaking also as a Latina woman with and a mother of 2, I just disagree. I think that a woman's right to choose is an innate right, and a woman's right to choose what to do with her body is an innate right. And while maybe it will help him with the GOP nomination, these comments will not help him win a general election.
Do you see him do you then, Rachel, see him as the ultimate unifier?
Again, I don't know. It is so early. I would be a fool right now to tell you that I could predict this race. What I do think is that he is growing as a candidate. He is becoming much more articulate on his points of views, much more, I think, aware of the traps out there in the media, and he is really improving. I think they all are. This is an exciting race. This is really, you know, the Republican Party is the free market party. Talk about free market and competition. This thing is going to end. I don't know how, but the best candidate will rise to the top.
And Patty, what's fascinating too is Ben Carson isn't really campaigning. He's on his book tour, but he seems to be either gaining traction or at least getting the attention of his sentiments even while he's on this book tour.
Right. Well, what I think is going on really in the Republican Party is a primary within a primary. There's the race for the anti-establishment candidate, and there's a race for the establishment candidate. And right now he's running against Donald Trump. That's who he's running against. And the styles are so dramatically different between Trump and Carson that I think that his natural style, his soft-spokenness, his collegiality is playing better in places like Iowa than Trump's bombastic.
And what I think is also interesting is that these candidates are being authentically them. Love them or not. Trump is being Trump. Ben Carson isn't trying to out-Trump Trump. He's just being Ben Carson. And I think you're seeing that with Marco Rubio and other candidates, that they are just being themselves, and we're able to watch this unfold. And we're going to have plenty of debates to decide on.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Ladies of Rachel Campos-Duffy, Patty Solis Doyle, thank you so much.
Thank you.